Food-producing agriculture accounts for 30% of total energy demand and generates up to 30% of human-made greenhouse gas emissions. Can we make it greener? We take a look in this episode of Sustainable Energy. Hello, I'm Asha Sampath. I've come to Italy's capital, Rome, to find out about the role of sustainable energy in getting food from the field to your fork and to see how nature-based solutions can make agriculture greener. Now, global food production is expected to increase 70% by 2050, so the sector is facing unprecedented resource pressures. Not very far from here are the headquarters of UN's Food and Agriculture Organization that actually made that prediction, and it's where our guest for this episode works. Olivier Dubois is the coordinator of the energy program at the FAO. We'll get his views on how we can transition from agriculture that relies on fossil fuel to more sustainable farming that works in harmony with nature. Also coming up on the show, we take you through some facts and figures to show why more sustainable food security models should be considered today. We see how investing in cutting-edge agriculture made the Netherlands the second biggest exporter of agricultural goods in the world.
You know, greenhouses are just as Dutch as wooden shoes, as tulips.
And we take you to Uganda, where a leader in sustainable energy shows us how you can turn farm waste into energy at home.
The crops are used for food, and the waste that the farmers generate, we use it to make energy.
Producing food takes a lot of energy. It's needed in all steps of the agri-food chain, from producing crops and rearing animals to harvesting, processing, storing and transporting food. So changing food systems is easier said than done. Here's why it's important to try.
It's estimated there could be as many as 9.1 billion people living on this planet in 2050. That's roughly 30% more than today. So is there a way to feed everyone while preserving the planet? Since World War II, modern agriculture has developed into a monoculture. This is where very large portions of land are used to grow a single crop. Farming also relies on the massive use of fertilizers and chemicals such as pesticides. It's estimated 3.5 million tons could be sprayed on fields worldwide in 2020. Monoculture and pesticides have worked well together to increase the yield to achieve food security for the planet. But this has come at a high price for the environment. Food production may have increased, but the FAO warns that soils, forests, water, air quality and biodiversity continue to deteriorate. And it's not even stopped world hunger. Industrial farming could also be threatening insects. That's the warning from Friends of the Earth in their 2020 Insect Atlas report. Experts say at least 10% of insect species are threatened with extinction. That could put food production at risk. Our tiny friends have a huge role to play in food systems. It's estimated that 75% of the world's food crops depend on pollination by insects. And insects are also great at processing natural waste. They decompose manure, dead plants and animals to help improve soil quality. Could agroecology be the answer? Agroecology is based on a farmer's local knowledge of their land, combined with the latest scientific developments on soils and biodiversity. Agroecology turns its back on synthetic fertilizers and tries to reduce the use of machinery. And here are some more tips for greener agriculture. The International Fund for Agricultural Development encourages the use of agroforestry and avoiding monoculture. By growing different types of plants, it makes the soil richer with nutrients and attracts a wider variety of insects. Importantly, it helps to ensure one type of insect doesn't become dominant and damage too many crops. There are other problems facing food production. About a third of the food produced globally is lost or wasted. With it, about 38% of energy consumed in food systems. So the FAO recommends turning to energy-smart agri-food systems. But it also says that to achieve this, world governments must invest in the transition to sustainable agriculture, and measures need to be supported by farmers themselves. This might mean saying goodbye to intensive, large-scale monoculture, but it could lead to a greener planet.
Olivier, welcome to Sustainable Energy. Could you tell us a little bit about this place, which is amazing, by the way? The city centre is right behind us.
Yes, this is indeed an amazing place. It's called Caffarella Park. You have 2 farms, you have sheep, you have cheese production. So it's a very good example of the integration of spaces, wild park plus agriculture.
Olivier, you work for the FAO, which is driving the issue of green energy in agri-food value chains, but you also have your personal views on the matter. Does greening food chains mean changing food systems? And what does it mean for us, consumers?
Yes, indeed, it means changing things both from the production side, but also from the consumer side. We need to introduce renewable energy in food chains, but we also need to consider the integration of water and energy use in food production. So basically being more resource efficient because of the stress of the natural resources, but also the need to become low carbon. The meaning for consumers is that they need to ask for these solutions because you need to create a market for that so that the producers are motivated.
What's the relationship between energy, agriculture and food security?
Well, you need energy at every stage of the food chain. So it's essential for food security. So you need to be very efficient in the resource use, but also you need to decarbonize your food chains. For energy, for FAO, what we propose is what we call the Energy Smart Food Program, which basically aims at supplying energy at every stage of the food chains. And in many countries, you don't have that. But also to do this in a more efficient way, using renewable energy and integrating the use of water and energy in food production.
How are governments responding to what you're saying?
You have a lot of governments who realize that lack of energy is a major cause of food losses because you don't have energy for cold chains, for storing food, and so there's a big interest in that. But also, for example, for Africa, more than 80% of their national determined contributions, which NDCs, which is their commitments to fulfill the Paris Agreement, they include bioenergy. So it really shows a trend towards addressing these issues.
Which countries are showing a will to make a change?
You have a lot of countries, for example, where you have emergency situations, crises, refugees. And there, the refugees, they grab whatever source of energy they can. It's usually wood to cook, to heat themselves. And so the governments are realizing that. And so they want solutions greening the energy use in refugee camps, but also for host communities. Because if you don't do it for host communities, it creates conflicts. So there's a lot of interest in those kind of things in many countries where you have refugees in the Middle East, the Horn of Africa, East Africa. But beyond the refugee situation, you have very interesting programs, for example, on biogas in China, in Vietnam. You have interesting program on rural energy in Morocco, and on a different level, in a way, in Abu Dhabi, in UAE Emirates.
Thank you, Olivier. We'll hear more from you later. We've got to take a quick break. When we return, we head to the Netherlands, a country with plenty of knowledge to contribute to cutting-edge agriculture.
The idea is to install these facilities in the south of Europe, North Africa and Middle East.
The Netherlands are leaders in greenhouse farming. They are a great solution to save water, but it's a bigger challenge to power them. Crops growing inside need heating and cooling, and that uses a lot of energy. We travel the country to meet scientists and entrepreneurs working on climate-smart greenhouses.
Cycle through the Dutch countryside and you'll be surrounded with cows. But from the air, you will see fields of high-tech structures where fruit and vegetables are cultivated. Greenhouses have helped make this tiny country the second largest exporter of agricultural goods behind the United States. A leader on the market, Van der Hoeven, has been designing climate-controlled farms since 1935.
Greenhouses are just as Dutch as wooden shoes, as tulips. It's a cliché, but it's true. The greenhouse was invented in the Netherlands in the 19th century when they started putting grapes under glass to improve production.
Van der Hoeven built the Rainbow Grower Farm 50 kilometers north of Amsterdam on a 25-hectare plot. 8 tons of peppers are harvested here every year. Greenhouses produce more crops but use less water than an open field.
It allows you to fully control the climate inside the greenhouse, being temperature, humidity, but also controlling the levels of pests and insects. There is a demand definitely for clients to build sustainable greenhouses with efficient use of energy and to reduce as much as possible the use of fresh water, electricity, and that's where our challenge lies at the moment.
95% of the company's turnover comes from selling its greenhouses abroad. The Middle East and China are the largest markets. But the problem is greenhouses consume a lot of energy and facilities must be adapted.
When you build a greenhouse nowadays, there will be limitations on where you can build because it all depends on availability of energy.
In 2018, Rainbow Grow and other greenhouse operators invested in a project led by ECW, a private energy company that's managed to cut back 50% of its natural gas use for heating. It sells geothermal energy extracted from a well 2,000 meters deep. The pumped-out water is 80 degrees Celsius, warm enough to heat at least some parts of the greenhouses.
It's very clean energy, sustainable energy, because the heat in the earth originates over there. Geothermal energy is more or less a local source of energy. It's technically possible to transport geothermal heat, but it's limited to, well, maybe several kilometers.
Solar thermal energy is another source of energy for greenhouses, but it's hard to store. So this startup, Solho, has come up with a solution that can be found inside this container. It's called Sprout, which stands for Solar-Powered Horticultural Off-Grid Unit, a miracle with a complicated name.
The Sprout is the only solar energy-based system that can power a greenhouse farm 24/7. And what it does, it uses solar energy as an input to generate all the energy flows required to operate a greenhouse farm: heating, cooling, and electricity. So what you can see in this picture is a solar field of flat plate collectors. So we heat up water, we store it in our thermal storage, which we call the test mod. And then from here, we harvest this thermal energy either for heating or for cooling through a thermal chiller or for electricity through a power unit. So in this way, we end up with a system that uses only the sun to generate all the energy streams required to operate a greenhouse farms.
The project was recently tested in the south of France. It is targeting clients worldwide who need heating and cooling solutions.
The idea is to install these facilities in the south of Europe, North Africa, and Middle East. Areas where there is a lot of sun, but no infrastructure to power these greenhouses.
With 2 major universities at the forefront of sustainable agriculture, the Netherlands has created an environment where scientists and business investors such as Adriano can thrive, proving you can improve food production while using sustainable greenhouse-based agriculture.
There we saw an example of grand-scale sustainable agriculture. What do you think of this greenhouse model?
Well, this greenhouse model is part of a series of farming systems which try to optimize the use of land and produce the maximum of food on a small amount of land, which is great because it's part of the whole need to be very efficient in the way we use resources. The problem is you need to also look at the other inputs and resources needed to produce the food. So if you're in a place where you don't have a lot of water, you need to think twice before promoting that kind of model. Taking another model which also aims at maximizing the use of land, but also, in this case, maximizes the use of water, so reduces the use of water for the same amount of food, it's vertical farming. But whatever the system, these sophisticated systems, they cannot produce everything. And in particular, they cannot produce staple crops like cereals, they cannot produce trees that produce fruits, and they cannot produce oil crops, for example. So you need also the other systems that use land to complement these systems.
What about smallholders and small-scale businesses?
In that case, again, if the energy is affordable, is reliable and sustainable, it's great. But in these cases in particular, you need to be particularly careful in one thing is integrating it with the uses of other assets like land, like water, no competition. But for example, also the use of residues from food chains, which seem fantastic solution. you need to look at the way they may be used for other things, like in farms for soil fertility or animal feed.
Should certain energy sources be banned?
I would say no. The ones that are usually pointed at is fossil fuel. But you cannot change overnight from fossil fuel to renewables. If to produce food and reduce food losses, the only available energy and affordable energy is fossil, let's go first for that. You need to give time for things to evolve and farmers to afford maybe renewable energy. The other big one, which is normally pointed at, is biofuels, because it's part of it uses the same feedstock as to produce food. For instance, you have what we call flex crops, like corn, which produces ethanol, so biofuel, but the byproduct is animal feed. Biofuels, again, it's promoted as absolutely a needed pathway for climate change, but you have to be careful the way you do it. The good news is that we know how to do it right.
Thanks, Olivier. We'll talk a little bit more about bioenergy in a moment. Because after the break, we head to Uganda to meet a man who is trying to change energy consumption by turning farm waste into bioenergy.
We feel we need to have alternative fuels to support the growing population.
Welcome back to Sustainable Energy. Today we're looking at solutions to make agriculture greener. According to the UN, almost 3 billion people have limited access to modern energy services for heating and cooking. Half of them have little or no access to electricity. Let's take a look at how one man is helping people access power by showing them how they can produce their own energy using home and farm waste.
In Uganda, 90% of our population are farmers, and many of the farmers are growing crops. The crops are used for food, and the waste that the farmers generate, we use it to make energy. My name is Vianney Mwesige, an environmental scientist. I graduated with a PhD in environmental sustainability from the University of Aberdeen. I returned to Uganda and founded a company, Green Heat Uganda Limited, that focuses on generating energy from waste. The most dangerous pollution generated by agriculture in Uganda is waste from the dairy farmers. The dung generates methane, which methane is 4 times more dangerous than CO2. The second process follows the mixing. We put the material in the mixer. In the mixing machine, we add the binder. After 2 minutes of mixing, the material is brought here and it's put in this machine. This is the briquette press. So the mixed material is pressed together and we make a briquette like this, which has to be dried. This is the drying bed. After 4 days, we package the briquettes and we take them to the capital, Kampala, and we also distribute them to places around the factory. This place uses our briquettes to cook food for a number of people around this area. I've known Najima for a number of years. Initially, she was using charcoal as a cooking fuel for her restaurant, but as we started making briquettes at our facility, we introduced briquettes to her. She's been using them as a cooking fuel for her business. Uganda has a population of 40 million people. There is more demand for energy, for cooking, transport, running the industries. We feel we need to have alternative fuels to support the growing population.
Here we have 2 cows and 2 calves. So from there, that's where we get some of the gas.
We'll take in the animal manure from the cow, and the manure is mixed with urine. We mix it with water, and we put it in a biogas system, which is at the back of the farm. Basically, here we are standing on a biogas system. It's a large piece of infrastructure that was built in the ground. And when waste comes from the mixing point, it flows to a digester. And after a couple of days, gas is generated. Goes through a gas meter and it flows to the kitchen. After the process of digestion, we get manure, which is sprayed here. This manure is used for crop production. And instead of buying artificial fertilizer, this can be a substitute for the manure that is required in the fields.
Instead of collecting raw firewood, you look for grass to make a fire and whatever, it takes long. But here I just get a matchbox, I light, and then I start cooking. It is very, 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 very efficient. It is economical because the money we would have used to buy firewood, we use it for another thing.
As a child, you're growing up, you're seeing problems, but you don't know how to solve them. But as you grow up, you learn that certain problems can be managed better. Coming back to this facility makes me proud. Each time I see the waste being used to make biogas, it gives me a lot of strength and keeps me motivated to keep working more on these projects.
An interesting story, but perhaps not easy to develop on a large scale. Could we all be producing our own energy?
If you have the feedstock to do it, if you have the sun, if you have the biomass, yes, you can do it. This example is a great example. In fact, at FAO, we've worked a lot on what we call integrated food energy systems, which is exactly what this gentleman is doing. He's producing both food and energy on his farm. If you want to replicate, multiply this example, it's great to have a champion. He may be followed by a couple of people, but you need policy support, you need incentives, you need credits to help the people who want to do that. But also, if I move now to an example where you had this done on a massive scale, which is China, where they produced 40 million biogas household systems. They are now moving a bit away from that because they realize that farmers, they do farming well. They may not be doing energy well, so you ask them maybe too much. In general, they are moving away to more village level energy producing systems where the farmers supply the waste, for example, like in this case, but then the specialized energy company produces the energy and then sells the energy to the farmer. So it's a division of labor. You leave to everybody what they do best.
How would all that fit in the green revolution that the FAO has called for?
Yeah, the FAO is actually called for a second green revolution because the first one was basically improving yields. And what we mean by that basically is that, yeah, let's keep doing that, but in a more social and environmental friendly way. So energy, but in general, greening food chains fits perfectly into that because you are more resource efficient, you are more environmental friendly, but you still produce food. The challenge is to do that in an affordable way.
Are you optimistic about the future?
In the long term, yes, but there's a lot to do.
Olivier Dubois, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for giving me this opportunity to be with you today.
It appears the will to build a more sustainable agriculture sector is growing, with scientists and researchers looking for solutions and building partnerships with businesses. Will consumers around the world embrace the green revolution too? We'll have to wait and see. Changing minds could be the biggest challenge. Well, that's it for this edition of Sustainable Energy. If you'd like to comment on this program or our theme this year, nature-based solutions, then do get in touch on Twitter at CNBC Energy. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, goodbye.